When two guards tried to move a black Marine from his son's graduation, no one expected 6 Navy SEALs to rise from the crowd and stop the entire room. Without saying a word, Solomon Dryden didn't expect anyone to recognize him. When he pulled into the parking lot behind Elmridge High, the building looked like most high schools in smaller Texas towns. Weathered red brick, a few flags fluttering over the entrance, kids loitering near the gym doors. It was already crowded, parents and dress shirt siblings holding signs, a grandmother leaning on a walker. Solomon Dryden pulled his weathered Dodge Charger into the crowded parking lot behind Elmridge High School. The building looked like most small Texas town schools. Weathered red brick, a few flags fluttering over the entrance, teenagers loitering near the gym doors. Parents streamed toward the building in their best clothes, carrying flowers and cameras. Grandparents moving slowly with walkers and canes. What they couldn't see was the 8-hour drive from Temple that had brought Solomon here. What they didn't know was that this same car had been his late wife's favorite, and that he still felt closest to her on long stretches of highway. What they couldn't guess was that the man stepping out of that ordinary sedan had once led rescue operations in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Solomon smoothed the lines of his deep blue Marine dress uniform. His boots were polished to a mirror shine, not for show, but because there were things he simply didn't know how to do halfway. At 6'2", with graying temples and skin weathered by years of service, he moved with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen life from angles most people couldn't imagine. But to the casual observer, he was just another proud father arriving for graduation. Inside the packed gymnasium, metal folding chairs filled the floor while bleachers overflowed with families. The air carried the scent of popcorn and floor wax, mixed with the excited chatter of hundreds of voices. Banners proclaimed Class of 2024 in silver letters across the gym wall. Solomon presented his printed ticket to a volunteer at the entrance, a short man with a clipboard and nervous energy. The volunteer barely glanced at him before pointing toward the third row on the left side. "Family seating up front," he said quickly. "You're all set." As Solomon made his way to his assigned seat, he caught the glances. Some people did double takes at the uniform. Others looked away quickly as if they hadn't been staring. A woman smiled politely, then whispered something to the man beside her. Solomon had been black, tall, and in uniform for long enough to read the difference between curiosity and something else entirely. He found his plastic chair in the third row, slightly wobbly, but he adjusted it without complaint. The stage stretched before him, decorated with school colors and the promise of ceremony. Somewhere among the rows of nervous graduates stood his son Tyron, tall, lanky, with his mother's intelligent eyes. 18 years had passed like a single breath. What Solomon didn't notice, because he was focused on scanning the crowd for his son, was that he wasn't the only military veteran in attendance. Scattered throughout the gymnasium, 6 men had taken seats in different sections. They didn't sit together, didn't acknowledge each other, but anyone trained to notice such things would have recognized the way they carried themselves. They sat with the same alert stillness. They scanned rooms the same way. And every single one of them had served under Gunnery Sergeant Solomon Dryden in the mountains of Afghanistan 15 years ago. The anthem and the approach. When the processional music began, the crowd rose as one. The national anthem followed, hands over hearts, voices raised in unison. Solomon stood at attention, shoulders squared, arms at his sides. His entire presence was a salute, no gesture required. As the last notes faded and people began settling back into their seats, Solomon noticed 2 uniformed men walking down the side aisle. Their badges read Harlan Security Services, and their black polo shirts were tucked into cargo pants. Neither looked older than 30. The shorter one had broad shoulders, a shaved head, and the kind of tight expression that suggested he took his authority very seriously. The taller one was lanky and chewed gum, like he had somewhere better to be. They moved with purpose, and they were heading directly toward the third row. The initial confrontation. Solomon noticed them approaching, but didn't flinch. Years of training had taught him that stillness was often more commanding than movement. He kept his eyes forward, hands resting loosely on his thighs, even as the shorter guard stopped beside his chair. "Excuse me, sir." the guard said in a low voice, leaning down just enough to be heard. "We're going to need you to come with us." Solomon slowly turned his head. "Is there a problem?" The taller one stepped forward, his gum chewing becoming more pronounced. "Yeah, this section's for families of graduating seniors." Without a word, Solomon reached into his coat pocket and pulled out the same printed ticket he'd shown at the door. "This is my seat. 3rd row left side. Family seating confirmed." The shorter guard, his badge read Garvin, didn't even look at the ticket. "We got told it's full." "It was full when I sat down, too," Solomon replied calmly. "You want to tell me who gave that order?" If you are enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means a lot to us. We are just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you. And back to the video. A few heads had started turning. A woman 2 rows over nudged her husband and nodded toward the developing situation. Someone in the bleachers subtly tilted their phone, possibly recording. The tall guard shifted uncomfortably. He wasn't expecting such a calm, clear voice in response. "Look, it's not a big deal. There's some extra seats in the back. Let's not make this anything it doesn't have to be." Solomon's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with the quiet calculation of someone reading a situation. "I drove 8 hours to watch my son walk across that stage. I'll be sitting right here." Garvin straightened up and looked around, clearly uncomfortable with the attention they were drawing. "Sir, I'm going to ask one more time." "You can ask all day," Solomon said, his voice lower now, firmer. "I'm not moving." The taller guard, Mally, according to his badge, sucked his teeth in frustration. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable in the back. That's all we're saying." And there it was. Solomon looked at him fully now. That phrase wasn't about logistics or policy. It was about something older, something quieter, something that had followed him into boardrooms, waiting rooms, and even base cafeterias. Always delivered with a smile, always wrapped in reasonable language. Solomon didn't respond to Mally's suggestion. The air around them shifted the way it does when people start sensing a line has been crossed. The woman beside him, older, pale-skinned, leaned slightly toward him and whispered, "Don't you let them move you." He nodded once, acknowledging her support but saying nothing. He didn't want to make a scene. He wanted to watch his son graduate like any other father. But the guards weren't finished. Mally lowered his voice again. "Look, you got a problem. Take it up with the school office. We got our orders." "You have a name, son?" Solomon asked. The guard blinked. "It's Officer Mally." "Not officer," Solomon replied. "You're private security." Garvin stepped in, his patience clearly exhausted. "All right, that's enough. If you don't stand up." He didn't finish the sentence because that's when the gym door at the far end clicked open, and something in the room's energy shifted. What neither guard understood was that their conversation had been noticed by more than just nearby parents. 6 men scattered throughout the gymnasium had been watching the exchange with growing intensity. They didn't know each other's locations, but they all recognized the man being harassed. Garvin leaned down again, this time with something harder in his voice. "Listen, man, you're making this into a situation." "And you're not listening," Solomon replied. Garvin's hand twitched toward the radio on his belt, but before he could say another word, a voice cut through the tension from 10 feet away. "Is there a reason this man's being bothered?" The voice was clear, calm, controlled, the kind that doesn't rise to get attention but drops just enough to make everyone else stop talking. It came from a man standing in the center aisle, tall, salt and pepper beard, fitted black coat over a gray shirt. Garvin looked up, caught off guard. "Who are you?" The man didn't answer. He stepped forward once. "I asked you a question." What Garvin and Mally couldn't have known was that the man now standing in the aisle was Creed Marston, the same Marine Solomon had dragged 200 yards through enemy fire in Kandahar, saving his life while bullets rained down like hail. "Sir, we've got this under control," Mally said, raising his hand. "No," Creed replied, his voice sharper now. "You don't." Another man stood up from the far bleachers. Then another. By now, 4 of them were on their feet, and Solomon remained seated, still quiet. The entire left side of the gym was watching openly. A boy pointed. A teacher tried to wave attention back to the stage, but nobody was looking at the ceremony anymore. Creed took one more step forward. "You're embarrassing yourselves, and you're one breath away from making this worse." That's when Garvin made his fatal mistake. His hand hovered near his belt, not on a weapon, but near enough to feel threatening, and in a voice loud enough for nearby families to hear clearly, he said, "You think wearing that uniform makes you better than everybody else? This is a high school, man, not your base." A hush fell across the rows around them. Even Mally took a half step back, as if the words had landed heavier than expected. But Garvin had just made a mistake that would change everything, because what he didn't understand was that the man in uniform he was dismissing wasn't just any veteran. Solomon Dryden was a decorated Marine gunnery sergeant who had led one of the most successful rescue operations in his unit's history. The men now standing around the gymnasium weren't random supporters. They were Navy SEALs whose lives he had saved. Creed's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but it carried through the suddenly quiet space. "If you touch him, you'll answer to me." "And who the hell are you?" Garvin demanded. "The man who's telling you this ends right now." By now, all 6 SEALs were standing. Javier Meeks rose from 4 rows back. Zachary Wells found his footing on the right side bleachers. Each movement was deliberate, coordinated without coordination. These weren't just spectators anymore. They were a unit. Garvin looked around, finally realizing they weren't just dealing with some angry parent. These men didn't fidget or shift from foot to foot. Their presence filled the space like pressure before a storm. One of the school board members noticed what was happening and whispered something urgent to the principal. An assistant principal got up and started moving toward the back of the gym, probably calling someone on her walkie-talkie. The school staff was finally realizing this wasn't going to die down quietly. Creed took a step closer, his voice calm but unmistakable. "You've got 2 choices. Walk away now, or watch this go somewhere you don't want it to go." "Let's just back off, man." Mally's voice finally cracked through the tension, but Garvin still hesitated, his pride warring with his common sense. Solomon spoke again, not to Garvin but to Creed. "Don't waste your breath." He already made his decision. Creed didn't smile. He just lowered his voice one last time. "Don't mistake silence for weakness." Finally, Garvin stepped back, not much, but enough. His hand dropped away from his belt. His face burned, but he was outnumbered and outclassed by men whose presence commanded respect in ways his uniform never could. The principal appeared near the aisle, whispering quickly to both guards. Whatever she said was quiet but firm enough to send them both walking toward the back exit. They didn't look at anyone on their way out. Solomon exhaled slowly and steadily. Creed sat back down without a word. All 6 SEALs remained standing for another moment, a silent statement that some things matter more than ceremony. As the tension finally began to ease, the ceremony resumed. Names were called, families clapped, but something fundamental had shifted in that room. Everyone present had witnessed what true respect looked like, and what happened when it was challenged. The moral victory. 20 minutes later, when Tyron Dryden was called across the loudspeaker, the room erupted in applause unlike any other graduate had received. The 6 SEALs, still standing, raised their hands and applauded in perfect unison. Not a performance, but a salute without the salute. Tyron walked across that stage with his chin high and his step steady, carrying not just his own accomplishment, but the dignity his father had fought to protect. As he accepted his diploma, he turned toward the audience and found his father's eyes. Solomon didn't wave or stand. He just met his son's gaze and gave the smallest, most meaningful smile of the day. Later, outside in the parking lot, as father and son stood together in the Texas heat, Tyron would ask his father about the men who had stood up for him. "They're men I bled with," Solomon would explain. "Men who know what loyalty means. Men who don't forget." And in that moment, Tyron would understand that he hadn't just witnessed his graduation ceremony. He had seen what it meant to carry himself with dignity, to stand firm in the face of disrespect, and to inspire others through quiet strength rather than loud words. Some people shout to be seen. Others sit in silence and are never forgotten. The lesson would stay with Tyron long after the diploma was framed and the celebration photos faded. Because sometimes the most important education happens not in classrooms, but in moments when character is tested and true leadership quietly emerges.